been actually quite a while since I've looked at a new device. I really like the idea of a cheap handheld, but there really hasn't been much out there that's caught my eye. However, I do think this TrimUI Smart Pro that I had recently sent over from GoGameGeek is a great option. When I first saw the pictures of this device, I was actually kind of really impressed by the design. I think it looks really cool, and overall it does actually feel like a very solid product. When it comes to that $99 price range and under, I don't really think there's much worth getting. I recently got the Mio Mini Plus, but unfortunately the glass that sits on front of the screen was falling off from one of the corners, so I had to push it back down. It kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. I also had an RG35XX and I had some issues with that too. I don't know if it's me just getting bad quality control, but stuff like that just kind of leaves a bad impression. So I kind of wanted to see if this TrimUI Smart Pro is the device to recommend for $100 and under. As mentioned, this was sent over by GoGameGeek, but they're not seeing this review before it goes up. They didn't pay me for this review, and of course all opinions are my own. So let's just dive in and take a look at the TrimUI Smart Pro and see if it's something I can recommend. I've been looking for a good budget device for quite a while to recommend to people, and I think this one might actually do the job. So let's just hop in and take a closer look. Since I've already unboxed this device, I can't really do an opening on it, but I will show you the box, and I gotta say, this does feel very high quality. You can tell this is a cheaper handheld though, because the big features of this device are you got that 5-inch screen, there's 2 joysticks on it, and it's got stereo speakers. The back of the box is pretty clean, and there's not really much to show. It does show us what we get in the box though. We get the game player, a cable, and the user manual. I've already unboxed this, so there's not going to be a console in here obviously, but you do have that little paper, and this shows an overview of the device and how to update the firmware. Mine also came with a 64GB memory card that was full of games. On the bottom of the package was a cheap USB-A to USB-C cable. As mentioned, this was sent over by GoGameGeek. I've actually never heard of these guys until a friend mentioned their name. I looked up their website and asked if they were interested in sending one over for review. There was no import fees and the box arrived safely. It was also really well packaged. But it took about a week and a half and it came directly from China. Let's take a quick look at their website and see how much it goes for. As mentioned, I've never really heard of these guys, so I was kind of interested to see what they have. Seems like the main currency on their website is US dollars, which is kind of disappointing. It's a shame that they don't have Canadian. When we buy things in US dollars, we also have to pay a currency conversion fee. But let's see what they have on their website. I'm kind of interested to see what they got. They got lots of emulation handhelds like the Mio, TrimUI, Anbernic, Powkiddy, Retroid. Let's take a look at how much some of their Retroid ones are. So it does look like they're charging a little bit of a premium. This is the regular Retroid Pocket 4. And they want $240 US for that. If you look on Retroid's website, it's $150. You do have to pay shipping charges on this, obviously from Retroid. It looks like they also have a 10% off coupon, and there's free shipping as well, so that's kind of nice. This is kind of interesting too. It looks like if you live in the US, you get a free device when you spend over $300. You can choose the TrimUI Model S, TrimUI Smart, 351p, or the RGB20S. These are very introductory level handhelds, but it's still kind of a cool gesture to get a free device once you're buying a new one. But we're looking at the TrimUI Smart Pro, and I know these go for around 75 to 85 Canadian. And as you can see, this one does have a bit of a premium as well. But they have some accessories for it too, and you do get some pretty quick shipping. As mentioned, it only took about a week and a half, so that's not bad. Cheapest these ones come down to is about $79, and you can use that 10% off code. It looks like for $10 more, you can get a 64GB memory card with some games on there. Down on the bottom, it shows you how many games you're gonna get, and I wouldn't buy a device based on this. I would just provide your own games. Looks like they also sell some home arcade units, some accessories for devices. There's a couple mini PCs on there. As long as you don't mind paying a little bit more than MSRP, this is not a bad place to get a device from. But I do think the TrimUI Smart Pro is decently priced, all things considered, especially since it's got free shipping. Let's take a quick look at the device itself. On the top we have the power button. There's the USB-C for data transfer. You have the volume up and down buttons, and we have the 2 bumpers and the 2 triggers. These are actually kind of small. I'm not really sure I like these, and they're also really clicky. The L2 and the R2 has a very hollow click to it, whereas the bumpers have more of a traditional click. On the bottom we have a function button. This enables or disables the turbo. There's also a little lanyard hole on the left side. In the center on the bottom you have the USB-C charging port, a microphone, the micro SD card slot, and a 3.5mm headphone jack. On the front we have a nice D-pad. You got 2 Vita-style joysticks. My left joystick sounds okay, but for some reason when I roll this right joystick near the top, it makes kind of like a little bit of a crunching noise. Sometimes this can correct itself over time. It's still kind of disappointing to see, especially on a new device. You got the ABXY up here, and they've gone for a Nintendo style layout. These are also on the small side, but I think they're okay. Any smaller than this though, and I'd say they're too small, but I do think these are okay. They're also using rubber membrane connections, so these feel very retro-like. There's a very hollow click to them, but it's not too loud, and I don't think it'll bother anybody. On the bottom right, we have the start and select buttons. These have a very hollow-like click to them as well. And the menu is on the bottom left, and that also has that same rubber membrane connection. There's also a very nice LED ring around the joysticks, and I really like these. They're not too bright, but they do add kind of a cool vibe to the device. The shell also has a very subtle texture to it, and I kind of like that. When you get matte black plastics like this, having a little bit of a texture helps resist fingerprints. And that seems to be the case here. This isn't going to be as good for fingerprints as if you didn't have a black device, but I still think it's pretty decent. I also really like the lettering on these face buttons. I think it looks very clean and very professional. As for the main device itself, one of the biggest features I think about this is the screen. It's really big and you have a very thin bezel around the outside. The funny thing is I almost wrecked this device when I got it because I had no idea that this was a plastic screen. And out of everything that I've seen so far, I can already tell you that's one of the biggest negatives I've seen about it. I did put a screen protector on there, but let me show you something. This is the screen protector that my friend recommended to me. I actually really like it. I think they're really good screen protectors. There's a lot of stuff in here that you can use to get it on correctly. However, the reason that I'm showing this to you is for these. Usually when you put a screen protector on a device, you kind of use these to peel off little pieces of dust. However, since the screen is plastic, adhesive really sticks. To put it simply, these don't come off easy. I had to peel one of these off and it left quite a residue. I had to use some rubbing alcohol to get it off. I was really worried about wrecking the plastic screen. So I don't recommend using something like this to get the dust off. Just use a nice clean microfiber cloth or just blow off the dust. But yeah, definitely don't use these dust removers. These are really nice for a glass screen, but when you have a plastic screen, just don't use them. I got 3 screen protectors in here and I got the first one on okay, so I still have 2 extras. For the money I spent on them, I think this was a really cool purchase. And I can't recommend these enough, especially since this device does not have a glass screen. This also adds a very nice rounded edge to the corner of the screens, and I think this looks really nice. This is a very good transition between the actual screen and where the shell starts. So since this is more of a casual review, I just kind of want to look at the main interface, what you're going to get, and kind of the experience that you're looking at. I stuck in that included micro SD card, so all these games are the ones that came with it. When you boot it up, this is what you're going to see. You get a simple menu, and I think this is very usable. You got a favorite menu, a recent menu, a best menu, where they've kind of gone and made some pre-made collections. And of course you have the game tab, which has all the games that you can play on it. I'm happy to see a lot of my favorite emulation systems on here. There's Dreamcast, Famicom, Game Gear, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, got Mega Drive, that's good to see. There's quite a few on this device, even some that I haven't played a lot of, like PC Engine. I've always wanted to try some PC Engine games, and some Neo Geo Pocket, so it looks like there's quite a few of them on there. We also get some PSP, PlayStation games, Super Nintendo, Sega Saturn, and WonderSwan Color. I actually kind of wanted to try WonderSwan Color too, so it's kind of cool to see a lot of these other systems that I don't really play on here. One thing I'm noticing as well is this is a really nice D-pad. It's got a very hollow click to it. I don't really like clicky buttons, so it's good to see a rubber membrane connection on this. When we select the menu button, this comes up with a edit button, search, or you can refresh your ROMs. There's one extra tab called app. This menu has things like the function key, USB storage. There's a few other options in here. There's a NetPlay tab. The last tab is the settings tab. So you can control things like the brightness, and it gets pretty bright. This is pretty good for playing at night. I can actually shut off my lights and we can see what this looks like in the dark. Hopefully there's not much noise, but this is with all the lights shut off. So this is very playable even at night. With my bright studio lights on, if I set this to 10, you can still see the screen really nice. And you can shut off the LEDs here as well. I don't actually mind them. I think I'll probably leave them on, but I'll probably just turn these down to the lowest setting. I kind of wish you could change the color on these. I think red would look really neat with this matte black. Since this has a pretty decent battery, I'm just going to set the lock screen timeout to about 10 minutes or so. You can also change the volume levels here and the background music volume as well as rumble. I'm going to shut off the rumble. For a $100 device, the rumble is pretty much what you expect. It's not great, but it's not terrible. We also have Wi-Fi on here for retro achievements. You can use a hotspot so you can play with someone on the go. It's kind of cool. There's a few different themes. You can change the key mapping. And the system menu on there has a few different settings as well, or you can do like a factory reset, hardware test, and you have your device info. So before I talk about the games on this device, I do have to mention something. When I first got this device, everything seemed to work. The buttons all worked on this side anyways. But when I went to confirm any options, none of these buttons worked. And the start and select didn't work either. And I figured out the reason why. On the inside, there's a little ribbon cable, but what they do is they put a very heavy-duty tape on it. I think when they put the tape on this in the factory, it kind of pulled out that ribbon cable. So I just pulled it off slowly, put that back down, and now this side seems to work fine. It did actually have me scared though. I was like, whoa, did I just get a brand new device and it doesn't even work? But I'm happy to see that that was an easy fix. So we can check out a few games. Let's start off on the easiest games. I'm just going to try Game Boy game first. They don't really seem to be sorted very well either. Here's one I recognize. Let's try Adventure Island. I think these joystick colors change depending on the system. I might try a custom firmware on this, but the stock one definitely seems to change colors. Another thing I'm noticing is there's a little bit of light bleed in my top left corner, but this is pretty typical for IPS panels, and I actually expected worse. This is a pretty decent panel actually. So let's start this up. I've been playing a lot on the Analog Pocket and my FPGA Game Boy lately, so this feels a little bit different. I'm not really noticing any input lag though, and it seems fine. If you press the menu in the bottom left, it brings up the menu here for your save states. You have an advanced menu, which will take you to the RetroArch menu, and you can also do NetPlay here, or you can just exit the game. Let's jump it up a little bit and try Game Boy Advance. Well, this is interesting. I can't actually turn the volume down to the very lowest. It's still playing somewhat even if I press the down button. It gets louder, but I can't shut it completely off from the buttons. If I press the menu, there's no option to adjust the brightness here or the sound. I think this can be fixed in custom firmware though. We are also getting a little bit of a filter on here that gives it a very traditional Game Boy Advance style screen. I really like that. You can probably shut this off in the RetroArch options if you don't like this, but by default, this is going to be enabled. Game Boy Advance should play fine on here, and I don't think you'll have any issues. Because of the aspect ratio, Game Boy Advance actually fits really nice on this screen. If you wanted to buy something specifically for Game Boy Advance, I don't think you'd be disappointed by this one. So I do want to see if we can shut the sound completely off now that we know we can't do that when we're in the game. I'm just going to go down to 0. So it looks like you can adjust it down to 0 when you're out of a game, but unfortunately when you're in the game, you can't. It's kind of odd. This is also a really nice system for Game Boy Color thanks to those nice bezels. I am used to a lot nicer screens, so for me personally, I am finding this a little bit washed out, but I do think it's still pretty decently vibrant. I'll have to check custom firmware later just to see if you can adjust the saturation on the screen because I think it needs a little bit of a bump. But if saturation doesn't bother you, I think the stock firmware is fine. It's kind of an odd experience playing DS on this screen, but I think it should work fine. So it looks like it is using Drastic. When you press the menu, it comes up with the Drastic menu. I think this is kind of where this device sets itself apart from things like the 35XX or the Mio Mini Plus. You're getting a device that can play more systems like the DS, Because it's also a horizontal handheld, it is a lot more comfortable to hold than a small vertical one. While Nintendo DS seems to work fine, let's see what else there is. Very first device that I had in this hobby was the RG351P, and Dreamcast did not run well on that. I'm going to try Sonic Adventure 2, as this is kind of the golden standard, I think, for Dreamcast games, and we'll see how well that works. The first level in Sonic Adventure 2 has a lot of particle effects, and I kind of find it pretty demanding. This is kind of why I checked this game over others for performance. So far so good though, but we're about to drop down, so let's see how it works. Pretty sure this is not 60 FPS, but it feels smooth enough to play, and FPS usually bothers me, but I don't think that this would. Yeah, this is very playable. I'm actually very impressed with this so far. You don't expect a $100 device to play Dreamcast, and look this nice too. The joysticks are okay, but they are pretty recessed into the device. So I am curious. I'm going to flip this function switch to the right, and I want to see what it looks like. Actually, that might be a little smoother. It's too hard to tell, but I think both of these are very playable. The only other thing that comes on this device would be N64 that might cause issues, so let's just try N64 and see how that works. Wonder if we have Pokemon Snap on here. Yes, we do. Let's try Pokemon Snap. Well, the joystick works in this, that's pretty good, and I've had that issue before on multiple games on Nintendo 64. It should be interesting to see if I can move the camera and how well this performs. This is looking pretty smooth. I've noticed this on a few emulation devices, but for some reason Nintendo 64, when you press the joystick, it'll just jump 90 degrees, but this one doesn't seem to have that issue. It also seems really smooth too. I'm very impressed with this device so far. The entire time while gaming too is very comfortable. I like these rounded edges and how they fit in your palm of your hand. One thing I'm noticing is my hands are getting a little warm, and I think that's just from the back of the device. Yeah, so this is why. The back of the device is sitting at 43 degrees Celsius. The right side is sitting at 43 degrees Celsius, or 108 degrees Fahrenheit. The center is at 35, which is still a little hot, and I don't really think that's going to be very comfortable. This is also 96 degrees Fahrenheit. Where your left hand grips onto the device, it's sitting at around 34 degrees Celsius. This is definitely borderline acceptable for what's comfortable. I find anything over 31 to 32 degrees is just a little too warm. Near the face buttons, we're looking at around 34 degrees Celsius or 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Near the D-pad, we're looking around 94 degrees Fahrenheit or 34 degrees Celsius. All in all, the temperatures are not bad, but that one side at 42 degrees is just a little too hot. I'm curious to see if custom firmware fixes this, but as it sits right now, that's a little bit warm. If you're playing games that aren't as demanding, flipping that switch off to turn off the turbo is probably a good idea. The left side is okay, but you're feeling that heat on the right. And this is going to make your hands pretty clammy. Because this is a matte black device too, you think you'd see a lot of fingerprints, but this is not the case here. I think it's because of the texture, and this still looks really good, even with my hands getting really clammy on the back. The back looks pretty good so far. So aside from the temperature, I did mention that these face buttons are a little close to too small. On a normal controller, I think about 10 millimeters is the perfect size for face buttons. And if we're looking at this one, they're 6.8 millimeters. So yeah, they're definitely small. Just to compare this to something recognizable in the community, to a device you already might have, the Retro Pocket 4 and 4 Pro sits at 7.2 millimeters for size on the face buttons, 6.8 versus 7.2. The Retro Pocket 4 and 4 Pro has a D-pad at 19.3 millimeters. This one again is slightly smaller at 17.9. Another place that this device is going to be very unique is in the fact that these joysticks are completely almost flush with the device shell. This makes it very easy to stick in your pocket, but you are going to notice this ergonomically when you're playing games that rely on these. Compared to the Retro Pocket 4 or the 4 Pro, these ones stick out way more. These devices are also very similar in thickness. It's a very thin device coming in only at 17.2 millimeters, whereas the Retro Pocket 4 or the 4 Pro comes in at 16 millimeters on the dot. Aside from this getting a little warm, I have been having a lot of fun on here. I think if you're looking for a device to get into this hobby, this is the one I'd recommend. It's built really well, you have a nice screen, it looks good for all your games. I didn't have to change anything, and I can already play a lot of these titles with no issues whatsoever. I actually haven't run into any issues performance-wise with anything that was put onto this device. The buttons are nice, and everything looks really good on here, except with how bad I am at this game. I've never tried any TrimUI products before, but I've been very impressed. To me anyways, this is already a better purchase than the Mio Mini just because it's more comfortable. It's only a few bucks more too. I don't really find myself using the triggers on this device, and a lot of the games that I would play in here don't use them anyways. However, since these triggers are basically flush with the device, this does make this very easy to stick in your pocket over something like the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro. If you try to put the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro in your pocket, you are going to notice these triggers. I find these get stuck on my pocket. However, these are more comfortable, so it all really depends on what you're playing. This is actually probably one of the cheapest devices that I can recommend actually picking up because it's somewhat good at what it does and it looks and feels great when you're playing games on it. I like the D-pad and the controls, and I really don't have much complaints about this device. The only two things that I don't like about it are, one, the screen is made of plastic. Glass screen lenses shouldn't be too expensive, and we've seen them on really cheap devices like the 35XX and the Mio Mini. Why did they use a plastic screen lens? I have no idea. Once you put your screen protector on there, that solves that issue pretty quick. Just don't use those dust stickers because you're going to have a hell of a time trying to get the residue off. The other thing, of course, being this device just gets a little warm. However, that's pretty easy to manage in most games that you're going to be playing on this by just flipping the switch on the bottom for when you're going to need it. The other thing that might bother you is these triggers. They're just digital and they're really small. But for what I play on this device, these don't bother me at all. I also thought the screen was going to be a tad brighter, but it's not bad. I don't think the screen's going to bother you. Streets of Rage is kind of an interesting one because I use it to check a lot of colors. If we look a little closer, the yellow doesn't really look yellow on some Ambernic screens. It looks more of like a pasty tan. However, the yellow does look pretty good on here. The blues are good as well. The whites look very white. So I do think this is a decent panel. I also haven't been bothered by the speakers, but these are pretty much what you expect for a $100 device. They're decent, but they're not going to compete with the Odin 2 or anything else like that. As far as charging goes, this one's a little bit of an interesting one. You can't use C-to-C charging cables, you can only use USB-A to USB-C. Checking with the testing tool that I have here, we're sitting at around 5 volts, 1.3 amps at 6 watt charging. This is pretty standard for most emulation handhelds, and I didn't expect to see quick charging on this device. It's a shame USB-C to C cables don't work because I'm slowly getting rid of my A to C cables, but charging works good. And if you're interested, that's what it charges at. It doesn't have quick charging, so this is probably going to take around 2 hours to fully charge. So what do you guys think about the TrimUI Smart Pro? Overall, I'm really impressed, and this is an easy recommendation for me. I think my unit was kind of an oddity with these controls not working. As long as you can turn that turbo switch on when you need it, and as long as you're okay with the screen lens being plastic and getting a screen protector for it, I think you're going to have a lot of fun with the Smart Pro. If you have any questions regarding the Smart Pro, make sure to ask in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and as always, thanks for watching.